Welcome to another video lecture for Paul as local theologian. This lecture will explore Paul and the concept of Lo Cotidiano, which we see in the article by Carmen Nanko-Fernandéz. In this brief video lecture, I want to provide sort of an overview of the concept of Locus Theologicus, the idea of the locations or the places or authorities of theological discourse in a traditional sense, and then build on that with what Nanko-Fernandéz calls Lo Cotidiano, the everyday, the everyday experience. I want to then build from that basic concept into some implications, some theological implications from this concept that arises in Latinx theological discourse, and then conclude with a little bit about how the concept of Lo Cotidiano might intersect with our reading of Paul, or Paul's letters, with our thinking of Paul as a theologian. I think it is important for us to start with the broad concept of what is a locus theologicus. Obviously, this is a Latin phrase that talks about a place, a theological place, or a theological location, might be another way of putting it. This is an idea that is often connected with scholastic thought in the 15th and 16th centuries, especially sort of emerging from the work of Thomas Aquinas. There is an example of this in Melanchthon's work on Lutheran theology following the Protestant Reformation, but there's also a very famous example of Melchior Cano's work in Catholic theology. And in this Catholic iteration of the places where authority can be found, the places where authority can be found for doing theological work, Cano identified 10. And so the first one is Scripture. The next would be the apostolic traditions, the early traditions that have been handed down, the notion of the universal church, various church councils, the authority of the Pope, the authority of church fathers, Greek and Latin speaking church fathers in the first 4 or 5 centuries of the early church, theologians and those who are concerned with canon law, the law of the Catholic Church, in other words. And then the final 3 are sort of outside of church tradition, and those are natural reason, philosophers, and history and human or secular tradition. So what's interesting, the starting point of these 10 loci, these 10 locations of authority, the reason to start there is to notice just what is missing. You'll notice that human experience, spiritual experience, religious experience, the realities of everyday life are not valued. They're not held up in that list of 10 locations of authority for doing theological work. And so in order to understand, I think, the really significant shift that an article like the one by Carmen Nanko-Fernandéz offers us, we have to have some background in what was considered a standard or an acceptable location of authority in previous theological discourse. What Nanko-Fernandéz argues throughout this article, and she's not the only one to do this, there are other Latinx theologians who have done this. Orlando Espín is one who has written an entire book about this, exploring aspects of this at a book length. But what Nanko-Fernandéz says is that Lo Cotidiano, the everyday life, daily living in its concrete expressions, is the starting point of theology done Latinamente, that is to say, of Latin American theologian or theological work. And it's connected with larger trends in theology that have turned attention to the self and human experience in the latter half of the 20th century. But what we see in Nanko-Fernandéz's article is the particularities of what this looks like for Latinx theologians and biblical scholars. And so she begins by affirming that the daily living in its concrete expressions functions as a primary locus theologicus. And then she explains that it is all of these things. It is the source of divine revelation. It is the content for theologizing. It is the context for theologizing. And it is the place of theologizing. Again, as she works through each of these in the article, we are becoming aware of just how important everyday life, common experiences are for Latinx theological discourse. And so as a source, Lo Cotidiano reminds us that the everyday life is the place of divine revelation, that in the ups and downs of life, in the experiences of God's absence and God's presence, this happens in the daily life, in the concrete expressions of daily living. She says on page 16 that the concrete and miscellaneous stuff of life informs our humble attempts to articulate understandings of the sacred and their implications for our relationships with each other and the whole of creation. So it is that provides the content. Everyday life, everyday experiences provide the content of what it means to do theological work, to do theological reflection. Considering that Lo Cotidiano is the context for theologizing or for theology, helps to challenge any abstract notion of theology, as well as any attempt to create a homogeneous, sort of monolithic understanding of theology. And really, the affirmation of Lo Cotidiano as a location of theological discourse arises from the particularity of lived experiences. And I love what Nanko-Fernandéz says about the trozos de la vida, the slices of life, that even our lives, our individual lives, are not homogeneous or monolithic. That our daily expressions of life, that our concrete expressions of daily living, may include a variety of related but distinct slices. So for me, I have slices of life that include my professional work at a church, my professional work in a seminary like Columbia Theological Seminary, but also the fact that I'm a father to 2 children, that I am a spouse to my wife, that I am a child of aging parents, one of whom has an advanced form of dementia. All of these are different and distinct slices of my concrete lived experience. We could also talk about the fact that I present as a white male living in a culture with a history of white supremacy, and how that also shows up in my concreteness of my daily experience. So again, it's really important that we remember that for Nanko-Fernandéz, Lo Cotidiano, the everyday experiences, are a source of divine revelation. They are the content of our acts of theology. They are the context for our theology. And they are the place of our theologizing. They are the place from which we do theology and we do theological discourse. Understanding of Lo Cotidiano in mind, I want to explore a couple of the theological implications of this form of thinking about theology and theological discourse. And I think the first one that is super important is the concept of collaborative work in theological discourse. One of the things that we very often receive, particularly in a Western context about theological discourse, is that it is tied to an individual thinker. Think about how often we talk about the theology of Calvin or the theology of Barth or the theology of, fill in the blank. We think about theologians as individuals, as solitary individuals who are working by themselves to create their own brand of theology. One of the gifts, I think, of Nanko-Fernandéz's article and of Latinx theological discourse in general is the fact that it starts from and it encourages collaborative work together. So it says, first of all, that theology is done en conjunto, that is to say, that is done together in communities of mutual theology. It is done in the context of togetherness, of collaboration. But it's also teologia de conjunto. It is also the theology that arises from the collective or from the comunidad, from the community. That means to say that it does not belong to a single individual, it does not belong to a single scholar, but rather it is both done in the context of community and it is done from the context of community and for the benefit of the community. I think that this is a tremendous gift, a tremendous insight for us. Nanko-Fernandéz discusses Juan Flores's idea of comunidad, of community, that says it combines both that which is común, that which is shared in common, and unidad, that which binds us together. So that what comunidad suggests in Latinx theological discourse is a combination of diverse particular commonalities, that it holds both. This idea of community holds both the particular and the unity. And it reminds us that theology done latinamente, as Nanko-Fernandéz would put it, is done for the sake of real communities. It is not abstract. It is not taken apart. It's not disconnected from everyday life in the barrio, right, in the neighborhood, as another Latin American theologian would put it. But it's always a matter of lived experience that seeks to accompany, seeks to go alongside of that community work together. And so there's a final notion of this collaborative nature that's tied up with the Spanish word convivencia, which again has the idea of living together, and it suggests the intimacy out of which our life comes, individually and collectively. So one of the emphases in this article that I think is important for our purposes in this class is that theological work happens in collaboration. It happens in community. And it sort of presses against our own tendency to think about individual theologians who produce their own individual brand of theology, and instead invites us to think about a communal approach to theological reflection and theological discourse. There are other things in this article that are worth pointing out that are specific to some of Nanko-Fernandéz's work and her understanding of Latin American theological work. And she uses this metaphor of tapas, of these small plates that are served in a number of restaurants these days, and how these tapas, the metaphor of tapas suggests both the shared and limitless variety of these offerings, that although there is this limitless potential that each restaurant, therefore each theologian or each instance of theology, can only offer a limited offering based on what they have in front of them, based on local tastes, and based on the creativity of the chef. Also, that the metaphor of tapas is rooted in the ordinary. These are very often recipes taken from ordinary neighborhoods. They're not coming from a Parisian culinary school. They are coming from your great grandmother's recipe that has been sort of passed down and modified throughout the generations. It is tapas, and it also invites us to enjoy the possibilities of cuisine. Tapas are best shared together, which is another metaphor of doing a theology latinamente, and they inspire a sense of sharing life together. And in Nanko-Fernandéz's article, she talks about a number of these slices of life, or these tapas that theology done latinamente offers. And one of them is the hybridity, the idea of being experiencing life at the border or borderland of belonging and not belonging as being a fundamental part of the identity of many Latin American theologians. Also, a second one is the attention to the lived experiences of Latinas, of female Latinx individuals. That it becomes both, they reinforce the perspective, and the lived experiences of women really emphasizes and calls attention to the significance, again, of Lo Cotidiano. A third slice of daily life is that of people being on the move. The idea of movement is important. And finally, a fourth offering that she brings out is that of popular culture and popular religion, and how that becomes a source and a blending for theological discourse. Near the end of the article, she has a really important few sentences that I think summarize the overall perspective as well as the benefit of this approach to theology. She says, to comprehend la vida cotidiana as a locus theologicus is to appreciate the accessibility of divine revelation in the daily, the particular, and the local. To explore lo cotidiano is to recognize its complexity and the posture of humility necessary in the presence of mystery. To embed en nuestra cotidianidad is to accept the ethical obligations that convivencia demands. So there's so much to unpack in that quotation. But I think that quotation really, for me, that's from page 30 of the article, really, I think for me, opens up this concept of lo cotidiano for the study of Paul and Paul's letters. I think that the place to start is just that I think it opens our eyes to consider how is lo cotidiano showing up in the letters of Paul? To what degree is the everyday, common, popular, lived experience shaping the letters of Paul? Is it present in the letters of Paul? How much does that influence the sort of work that Paul and his co-workers are doing as theologians? I think a second is it reminds us of what archaeologists and those who specialize in material culture have been saying for years now, which is the importance of lived religion, the importance of lived experience. The reminder that although we only have access to Paul's letters, that Paul's letters emerged from a rich network of social and cultural and political realities that we have to sort of read behind the scenes to discover. I would say, thirdly, that Paul, to one degree or another, treats the everyday, the lo cotidiano, as a source or authority for theologizing. Again, just a couple of small examples of this. The discussion of meat sacrificed to idols in 1 Corinthians 8 through 10, this is something I've come back to again and again. This is a real world problem. It is not just abstract theologizing. It emerges from social relationships and eating practices and how to buy food at the market and how to be a good neighbor and how to participate or not participate in the cultural and religious world of one's neighbors. That is a lived experience. That is a real world problem. We can think as well of persecution, the reality of persecution in 1 Thessalonians. Or even 2 Corinthians, Paul's experience of persecution, or the death of Christians in 1 Thessalonians. That's an everyday problem. What do we do with the fact that our brothers and sisters in Christ have died? We might think even of Paul's numerous reflections on his travel plans and his intentions to plan, and how he uses those intentions and his disappointments and his anticipations of travel as a way, as a place of doing theology, as a place of reflecting theologically. And then a final example is just Philippians, the degree to which life together emerges in Philippians, and it is a collective life as well. I think a fourth way that we might think about Paul in relationship to this article by Nanko-Fernandéz is that Paul does theology en conjunto and de conjunto. Again, there is a strand, there is a tendency to interpret Paul as a single solitary genius, a single solitary theologian. But in actuality, Paul was doing work en conjunto. He was doing work with others. He had his co-authors, he had his emissaries and his co-workers. And of course, he had these communities that he was writing to, all of which suggest that Paul was doing theology en conjunto. But I also think that Paul was doing theology de conjunto. He was doing it for the sake of the community. Paul wasn't writing these missives so that they could become systematic theologies. He was writing them so that a community could know how to respond effectively and articulate their faith and live their faith in a particular way. And so I think it's really important. This is one of the insights from this article, is it helps us rethink about Paul as a theologian en de conjunto. And then the last thing that I would point out is just Paul's own hybridity, right? If hybridity is a central aspect of theology done latinamente, then that strand of theological discourse might say something. It might help us see something in Paul's letters, in Paul's act as a theologian, that help us make sense of the fact that Paul himself was a hybrid character. He was both Jewish and living in a Greco-Roman world. That he was a person on the move. That he found himself somewhere in between the Jerusalem church and the church in diaspora. And so again, I just think it might open up some avenues for our thinking about Paul if we apply, if we use some of Nanko-Fernandéz's work as a framework for reading and interpreting Paul's letters. I hope that this video lecture has given us some things to think about, some things to talk about as it relates to Paul and local theology. I hope that the video lecture has clarified aspects of the article by Nanko-Fernandéz, and I hope, above all, that it has given you new language or new concepts to think about the revelatory value of daily experience as a source and as the content and as the context and as the location for doing theology. Thank you so much for your time and your attention.